everybody. The overview of this course, Building a Synodal Church, helps us to focus on a point of great importance to the topic entrusted to me. Our aim is not to reflect on the Synod in general, in the abstract, nor to remain at the level of a description of the process of the 21-24 Synod, currently underway, but to focus on the characteristics of the way of proceeding of a constitutively synodal church. And so, in my case, given the issue of prophetic decision-making process, it is a matter of deepening how a discernment and decision-making process carried out in a synodal way can be authentically prophetic, may it be a source of inspiration for those who wish to proclaim the gospel in today's world. In this research of ours, the 21-24 Synod, however, is in any case an essential point of reference of which the reflections I propose here are focused. There are at least three reasons for this. First of all, it is truly a complex process of common discernment at the level of the whole Church. It is the first time that an ordinary General Synod has been held after Episcopalis Communio, transforming the Synod from a circumscribed event, an assembly of bishops, to a process of listening articulated in phases in which the whole Church, everyone in the Church, the people of God, the College of Bishops, the Bishop of Rome, are really participating. Thus, the Synod moves from being a meeting between bishops, focused on the production of conclusions in the form of a document on the subject under discussion, to a process in which the discernment of pastors takes place within a broader ecclesial process that cannot be ignored. As a result, the emphasis on the final document diminishes, which is no longer the only quote-unquote product of the Synod, and increases the emphasis on ecclesial processes that are activated at different levels, involving a plurality of figures, and that intersect in various ways with the ordinary life of the Church, including its decision-making processes. A second reason why the 21-24 Synod is important is that its content because it's the theme precisely the synodal church, and therefore the discernment process questions the characteristics of a synodal church. And here are all the documents produced. Particular mention should be made on the synthesis report of the first meeting and the instrumentum laboris of the first meeting. About a third of these texts are devoted to issues concerning the exercise of authority within the Church, and therefore intersected with the subject of decision-making processes. So there are quite a few ideas on those pages that we can trace for our reflection. A third reason that makes the 21-24 Synod an important reference for us is the methodology that was chosen to carry it out, the reflection, the research on the meaning of synodality, on how to implement this constitutive dimension of the Church, was carried out in a synodal way that is in coherence with its own objective. From the beginning, local churches have been asked to promote experiences of synodality and then reread them, evaluate them, learn from the successes, discover how to correct what has not worked, etc. And this is how the 21-24 Synod works. Its object also becomes a place for experimenting with its decision-making and discernment processes in the synodal logic, identifying the roles involved and their respective functions. In fact, we can describe it as a series of processes and discernments articulated with each other, which in the different phases involved three different subjects: the people of God, as we said, the College of Bishops, and the Bishop of Rome, each with its own function. A particularly significant example is the role of convening the synodal processes of validating the results at the different diocesan, national, and continental levels, which are entrusted to each of the bishops, to the episcopal conferences, which is thus experience a particular way of exercising authority within the people of God. This brings us to 3 points that I want to make in the course of this talk on prophetic decision making. A synodal discernment process. The first point, reflecting on the experience that has been made, pushes us to an in-depth study that can be fruitful precisely in the essence of the prophetic quality of the process, which is a point dedicated to the value of consultation and participation in a decision-making process. Since its constitution, in fact, the Synod of Bishops has had a purely consultative character, except in the case that has never happened until now, in which the Holy Father grants the assembly a deliberative faculty. This, if not, simply offers the fruits of their work to the Pope. All the more reason why the phase of consultation with the people of God, which has occupied the whole Church for about 2 years, and which since the Synod 21-24 Synod has been one of the most important elements, is devoid of any deliberative character. So what is the value of this decision-making process if it's only consultative? We live in a culture that tends to interpret decision-making as the exercise of some form of power or authority, emphasizing in an individualistic way the almost demiurgic role of the decision-maker and placing on their shoulders expectations and responsibilities that are often disproportionate. This is one of the contradictions produced by the drift of the personalization of leadership to the detriment of the role of the institutions that mark the crisis of all Western democracies. In this framework, the bodies, the consultative processes seem to have very little in common with a decision-making process that ends up being reduced to arbitrariness of the decision-maker. This is where the Synod pushes us to a different interpretation of decision-making processes that, in fact, in many of the contributions that the decision-maker needs to be able to make effective decisions that are good, prudent, and in line with the gospel, listening to the Spirit. It must already be said that Paul VI had intuited this, because in the year of 1965, he instituted the Synod of Bishops as a body through which, I quote, the bishops elected in various parts of the world who render more effective assistance to the supreme pastor of the Church. So, in the performance of his task of governing the Church, Paul VI knows that he needs not to lack the relief of their presence, the help of their prudence and experience, the assurance of their counsel, and the support of their authority, but without relinquishing his role as the final decision maker. The same logic applies to the different levels at which the life of the Church is articulated. According to this vision, which today is not exempt from a countercultural value, but exquisitely prophetic, consultation is not alien to a good decision-making process, but it is an integral and essential part of it. The process of the 21-24 Synod is precisely an opportunity to gain concrete experiences. The quality of the Assembly's discernment on some crucial questions for the life of the Church depends on the goodness of the consultation process with the people of God, from which the questions of the Instrumentum Laboris, which forged and directed the Assembly, were formulated. We can highlight 2 points about participation and the role and value of the consultation process. First of all, this vision allows us to grasp the deeper meaning of participation, of what it means to participate in a decision-making process, that is not only about whether or not to make the final decision, but above all, about the recognition of common dignity. This is the foundation of the equality of all and the indispensable contribution of each. As the Instrumentum Laboris says, quoting number 34 of the encyclical Centesimus Annus, actively contributing to the common good of humanity is an indispensable component of the dignity of the person, also within the Christian community. The first contribution that each one can make is to discern the signs of times, to keep the mission in tune with the breath of the Spirit. However, it is always the Instrumentum Laboris that brings out a second, even more exquisitely prophetic element of this concept of decision-making, pointing out that if all points of view have something to contribute to this discernment, those of the poor and the excluded must be considered in particular. For this reason, since the beginning of the 21-24 Synod, great emphasis has been placed on the importance of the voice of the poor and excluded also being included in the consultation, not just those who play some role or responsibility within the particular churches. The concrete implementation of this invitation has proved very difficult in many local churches, and also at all levels. Today, we must recognize that we need to do much more in this direction. But there remains the affirmation of the will to resist the mechanisms of exclusion that fracture our path, our world, and also the awareness that this represents a characteristic feature of authentically prophetic decision-making processes. It is also in this way, with these two characteristics of valuing the participation of all, that the importance of everyone being heard, and in particular the excluded, is also realized in a concrete way. This vision proposed by number 236 of the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, which says that the model, the polyhedron that reflects the confluence of all the partialities that maintain its originality, both pastoral and political action, seek to bring together the best of each in this polyhedron. Therefore, this is a fundamental desire, a fundamental dimension of a decision-making process that it cannot do without. And then it adds, this polyhedron is where the poor are inserted with their culture, their projects, and their potentialities. They give a new perspective that cannot do without. Now we come to the second point I want to emphasize regarding the prophetic decision-making process. Therefore, the design of the synodal process composes the horizontal instance of the participation of all, as we have seen with the vertical instance of authority, in the awareness that for the Church, the synodal and hierarchical dimensions are at the same time constitutive precisely, and this is proper to a synodality of articulation of these two dimensions, and this has also led to a recovery of meaning and, therefore, of the original task of authority, which is not control, but a capacity to grow. Along these lines, as has already been mentioned, the fundamental importance of the roles of synodal and participatory quality assurance of the processes evaluating the results emerges. This is the role that the synodal process has invited the bishops to experience, each in his diocese and together in the episcopal conferences. It was up to them to open the phase of consultation, of listening, to give life to the institutions in charge of carrying out the synodal theme, typically and finally to certify that the final synthesis corresponds to the process and that is carried out in an effectively synodal way and precisely with regard to a journey rooted in the faith of the Church. Again, here are two elements that we can highlight with respect to leadership. First, we discover a profoundly countercultural model of leadership, which is also the inner disposition of those who carry out a process of discernment, a synodal process of decision-making. These provisions, which are necessary to be able to carry out their function. It really is a great inner freedom that leads to prioritizing the process and the fact that really everyone can participate and thus guarantee results that are the fruit of a true listening to the Spirit, whose authenticity is guaranteed, and therefore so is the point of view of the leader. The path must be judged valid and self-sufficient, fruitful, in line with the gospel, not because it has reached a conclusion in line with the thinking of the final decision maker, but precisely because it has been a really effective process according to the typical indicators of discernment, with this ability to go through different emotions, alternating, but all that it means on the basis of the gospel and with the search for the good in mind. And this allows us to re-understand the role of authority, which is precisely to guarantee this process, because it is in its fullness that the church's ability to listen to God's voice and to encounter Christ, the bridegroom, the only one to whom the church belongs, depends. Those who have a role of authority within it are not teachers, but are at the service of this encounter with the bridegroom, with Christ. The leader does not think about himself and doesn't place himself at the top or in the center or even at the bottom. In this way, his figure becomes a promoter, a warrantor, the expression of a desire for unity that never turns into uniformity. His ability is precisely to journey together with the charisms that the Spirit has distributed in the community, to make these charisms journey together in their variety without excluding anyone, giving priority to the effort to include the poorest and those who normally remain on the margins of these processes. And a second element with regard to leadership that also comes to us from the concrete experience of the 21-24 Synod, and that has been understood to characterize the action of those who, within a process of ecclesial discernment, want to play a role of responsibility. At all levels, those who receive the fruits of a consultation are obliged to offer restitution to those who participated in the process. It is a dialogical dimension of confrontation, of conversation. It was nice to be able to represent the goodness of their listening, their validity of the synthesis, their analysis with the will to correct it. In this regard, the continental assemblies offer the opportunity to verify the validity of the synthesis offered by the working document for the continental stage. We have worked here in the Vatican to provide a synthesis, but it has been said and offered to all continents the opportunity to discuss these results, to recognize them, and also to suggest additions, changes, and in particular to underline the priorities that, from the different perspectives, could be highlighted. In this sense, it is a concrete way of assuming a fundamental need for transparency implicit in any genuinely participatory process. Without this dialogue, without this verification, an exercise in listening runs the risk of lending itself to manipulation, eroding self-confidence, and having a mindset of they decide everything and it's useless to be consulted. The dignity of the people involved is denied. As many political and social processes show, the frustration of those who have invested in participation and felt manipulated is a very powerful form of skepticism and disengagement. Source of skepticism and disconnection. At the same time, ensuring transparency through restitution makes it possible to safeguard the confidentiality of the space and to listen to the dialogue in which everyone must feel free to express themselves without hesitation, because everyone can also have an opinion. At the same time, there are those who recognize those who validate and help move the process forward, promoting participation, recognizing the quality of the different faces, and finding ways to reconcile the different needs. A final point that I would like to emphasize is always to start from the experience of the 21-24 Synod, but also to broaden the reflection precisely in the search for the characteristics of the modalities of a prophetic decision-making process in a synodal and missionary church. It is the importance and fecundity of the method that has gradually prevailed among the many suggested by the methodological vademecum published as early as September of 2021. Precisely because of the very wide adoption, beyond all expectations and the results that it has allowed to be achieved, I'm talking about conversations in the spirit. If you want a concise presentation, you can find it in the Instrumentum Laboris in numbers 32 to 42, which some have even designated as a synodal method. It was the basis of the long phase of consultation, of listening to the people of God in the various local contexts, and with the appropriate adaptations of the development of the first session of the Synodal Assembly on October 2023. This sense is something that has also surprised everyone who has grown up, showing a capacity to reach very different people and situations and to open up the understanding and experience of a synodal journey. There are two aspects through which we can understand in what sense it is a method that we can define as prophetic. In a way, this method gives participants a space to talk and listen. And many have said that it has been a long time since they have found spaces of this kind in the church. A space in which each baptized can take the floor and express their own point of view, with the hope to start from a work of reflection, of personal prayer on the matter in question, and then taking of the word of each one corresponds to the listening of the others. What's interesting, even in practice, is the extent to which the method makes it difficult to transition to dispute, to opposition, to controversy, without blocking authentic reflection. And in many contexts, especially the most popular ones, the possibility of speaking represented an unprecedented experience that deeply moved people, awakening enthusiasm and energy. It has been called a transformative experience, but also on all other levels. Conversation in the Spirit, which is part of the vast plurality of methods and approaches in the tradition of ecclesial discernment, allows participants to move from the I to the we. It does not lose or erase the personal dimension of the self, but recognizes it, inserts it into the community dimension. In this way, speaking and listening to the participants also becomes a liturgy, a prayer in which it is not only a matter of conversation among the members of the church, but precisely a moment when the Lord makes himself present when two or three are gathered in his name and moves towards more authentic forms of communion and discernment. And so, the horizontal dimension of the passage of moving from the I to the we is integrated with this vertical dimension of deepening the listening of the Spirit. In this regard, it should be noted that the concrete way in which the conversation in the Spirit has been experienced in the ongoing synodal process has been designed taking into account the profile and objectives of the phase of consultation and listening to the people of God, which is only the first phase, is certainly not the final and profound phase. Well, profound, yes, but not the final decision-making. But this form that the conversation in the Spirit has taken is not a canonical way by which one can handle any process of ecclesial discernment. While maintaining its potential, the tool should be adapted to the different contexts in which it is intended to be used, as has already begun in the first session on October of 2023. But it is necessary to advance again and again on the path of adaptation, both in order to give up adequate space, where necessary, to the contributions of the magisterium, of theological reflection, of the human and social sciences, and to take advantage of the plurality of forms and methods of discernment with which the Church's spiritual tradition is rich. This is also an explicit indication of the summary report of the first session. A second and final significant element that we find in conversation in the Spirit is the fact that the method aims to build a consensus that is not defined as the convergence of the minimum majority required. Example, a half of the participant plus one. That is, it's not a matter of a majority, of the consensus of a majority that wins as opposed to a minority that loses and will inevitably resist waiting to reverse the situation. It's about everyone listening to the Spirit and building a balance, a richness of vision that allows everyone to contribute something and feel represented by the common conclusion. Except in exceptional cases, this means that no one probably feels 100% reflected, but they may disagree with some points. However, everyone will agree that the conclusion is representative of the process that has taken place and is enriched by all the points of agreement and disagreement that have actually arisen. It is not, therefore, a matter of hiding conflicts under the guise of unanimity. It would be violence, albeit covert, but not even the deflagration and articulation of position is the result of a continuous clash and of almost taking on the flavor of a polarization by closing itself in one's own position. In fact, however, the result will allow us to continue journeying together towards new arrangements, especially by recognizing each other. If this is not the case, any decision is really experienced as an imposition that is not accepted, and if not, with great difficulty. And on the other hand, the contribution of each one of us, as we have said, is essential in the way we move forward. Therefore, the application of this journey in this conversation in the Spirit is not intended to supplant the principle of majority, but highlights that it cannot be the only reference, as is not appropriate for all contexts. In particular, in the Church, there are peculiarities that must be safeguarded, precisely the fact that we all together hear the voice of the Spirit and all contribute as baptized. The dynamics of the first session of the Synodal Assembly on October of 23 and the results of the vote that approved the synthesis report by a very large majority testified that it is possible to build a broad consensus, even in the presence of marked differences and a very strong cultural pluralism, as long as enough time is available for an effective method and for the right conditions of confidentiality as well as of a profound inner freedom. In other words, the increasingly extreme polarization that our societies are experiencing, particularly in the political sphere, is not an inevitable fate. It is a message of hope, especially for democratic systems that are perceived to be in crisis and that need to renew the dynamism of participation. Experience indicates that in a highly polarized society such as ours, the majority principle can be divisive and needs to find a complement in the dynamics of strengthening the social bond within a broader consensus in which everyone can identify the dynamism between the majority and the minority, or between the different positions, perhaps not just two, however alive they may be, will not run the risk of being perceived as oppressive, pushing the minority positions to renounce participation, to retreat, and will not even be a source of further divisions and revenge. Many of the cohesion problems that afflict our societies stem precisely from the withdrawal of those minority groups that feel excluded a priori, indeed, that they do not perceive any common ground on which to base participation and decision-making. We have come to the end of these reflections of these 3 points on participation: the consultation phase, its importance, the way to carry out leadership, and the method of a synodal way of proceeding and deciding. Other talks in this course will delve into different aspects of what we have outlined, but I hope that it would be at least a little clearer that a church capable of integrating all its members, of finding a place for them even within its decision-making processes, has a prophetic word capable of announcing the good news of the gospel to the societies in which it lives. Thank you all very much.